French Revolution, a revolutionary movement that shook France between 1787 and 1799 and reached its first climax there in 1789, hence the conventional term Revolution of 1789, denoting the end of the Ancien Régime in France and serving also to distinguish that event from the later French revolutions of 1830 and 1848. Origins of the Revolution. The French Revolution had general causes common to all the revolutions of the West at the end of the 18th century, and particular causes that explain why it was by far the most violent and the most universally significant of these revolutions. The first of the general causes was the social structure of the West.
The feudal regime had been weakened step by step and had already disappeared in parts of Europe. The increasingly numerous and prosperous elite of wealthy commoners, merchants, manufacturers, and professionals, often called the bourgeoisie, aspired to political power in those countries where it did not already possess it.
The peasants, many of whom owned land, had attained an improved standard of living and education, and wanted to get rid of the last vestiges of feudalism so as to acquire the full rights of landowners and to be free to increase their holdings.
And that's how the social structure of the West set the stage for the French Revolution. Furthermore, from about 1730, higher standards of living had reduced the mortality rate among adults considerably. This, together with other factors, had led to an increase in the population of Europe unprecedented for several centuries. It doubled between 1715 and 1800. For France, which with 26 million inhabitants in 1789 was the most populated country of Europe, the problem was most acute. A larger population created a greater demand for food and consumer goods. The discovery of new gold mines in Brazil had led to a general rise in prices throughout the West from about 1730, indicating a prosperous economic situation. From about 1770, this trend slackened, and economic crises, provoking alarm and even revolt, became frequent. Arguments for social reform began to be advanced. A revolution seemed necessary to apply the ideas of Montesquieu, Voltaire, or Jean-Jacques Rousseau. This enlightenment was spread among the educated classes by the many societies of thought that were founded at that time: Masonic lodges, agricultural societies, and reading rooms. S1, media, historical reenactment of intellectuals discussing in a salon, portrait of René Descartes, portrait of Benedict de Spinoza, excerpts of writings by Descartes or Spinoza. The philosophes, intellectuals whose writings inspired these arguments, were certainly influenced by 17th century theorists such as René Descartes, Benedict de Spinoza, and John Locke, but they came to very different conclusions about political, social, and economic matters.
It is uncertain, however, whether revolution would have come without the added presence of a political crisis. Faced with the heavy expenditure that the wars of the 18th century entailed, the rulers of Europe sought to raise money by taxing the nobles and clergy, who in most countries had hitherto been exempt.
To justify this, the rulers likewise invoked the arguments of advanced thinkers by adopting the role of enlightened despots. This provoked reaction throughout Europe from the privileged bodies, diets, and estates. In North America, this backlash caused the American Revolution, which began with the refusal to pay a tax imposed by the King of Great Britain. Monarchs tried to stop this reaction of the aristocracy, and both rulers and the privileged classes sought allies among the non-privileged bourgeois and the peasants. Although scholarly debate continues about the exact causes of the revolution, the following reasons are commonly adduced.
First, the bourgeoisie resented its exclusion from political power and positions of honor. Second, the peasants were acutely aware of their situation and were less and less willing to support the anachronistic and burdensome feudal system.
Third, the philosophes had been read more widely in France than anywhere else. Fourth, French participation in the American Revolution had driven the government to the brink of bankruptcy.
Fifth, France was the most populous country in Europe, and crop failures in much of the country in 1788, coming on top of a long period of economic difficulties, compounded existing restlessness.
And sixth, the French monarchy, no longer seen as divinely ordained, was unable to adapt to the political and societal pressures that were being exerted on it. Pause 2S. As we delve deeper into the events of 1789, a pivotal moment stands out, the meeting of the Estates General at Versailles on May 5, 1789. They were immediately divided over a fundamental issue. Should they vote by head, giving the advantage to the Third Estate, or by estate, in which case the two privileged orders of the realm might outvote the third? On June 17th, the bitter struggle over this legal issue finally drove the deputies of the Third Estate to declare themselves the National Assembly. They threatened to proceed, if necessary, without the other two orders. They were supported by many of the parish priests who outnumbered the aristocratic upper clergy among the church's deputies. When royal officials locked the deputies out of their regular meeting hall on June 20th, they occupied the king's indoor tennis court, Jeu de Paume, and swore an oath not to disperse until they had given France a new constitution. The king grudgingly gave in and urged the nobles and the remaining clergy to join the assembly, which took the official title of National Constituent Assembly on July 9th. At the same time, however, he began gathering troops to dissolve it. These 2 months of prevarication at a time when the problem of maintaining food supplies had reached its climax infuriated the towns and the provinces. Rumours of an aristocratic conspiracy by the king and the privileged to overthrow the Third Estate led to the Great Fear of July 1789, when the peasants were nearly panic-stricken. The gathering of troops around Paris and the dismissal of Necker provoked insurrection in the capital. On July 14, 1789, the Parisian crowd stormed the Bastille, a symbol of royal tyranny. Again the king had to yield. Visiting Paris, he showed his recognition of the sovereignty of the people by wearing the tricolour cockade. In the provinces, the Great Fear of July led the peasants to rise against their lords. The nobles and the bourgeois now took fright. The National Constituent Assembly could see only one way to check the peasants. On the night of August 4, 1789, it decreed the abolition of the feudal regime and of the tithe. Then on August 26th, it introduced the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, proclaiming liberty, equality, the inviolability of property, and the right to resist oppression. The decrees of August 4th and the Declaration were such innovations that the king refused to sanction them. The Parisians rose again, and on October 5th marched to Versailles. The next day they brought the royal family back to Paris. The National Constituent Assembly followed the court, and in Paris it continued to work on the new constitution. The French population participated actively in the new political culture created by the revolution. Dozens of uncensored newspapers kept citizens abreast of events, and political clubs allowed them to voice their opinions. Public ceremonies such as the planting of trees of liberty in small villages and the Festival of Federation, held in Paris in 1790, on the first anniversary of the storming of the Bastille, were symbolic affirmations of the new order. Pause 2S. As we transition into the next phase of the revolution, the National Constituent Assembly took decisive actions to reshape the French society. The Assembly completed the abolition of feudalism, suppressed the old orders, and established civil equality among men, at least in metropolitan France, since slavery was retained in the colonies. This monumental shift made more than half the adult male population eligible to vote, although only a small minority met the requirement for becoming a deputy. To address the mounting public debt, the Assembly made the controversial decision to nationalize the lands of the Roman Catholic Church in France. This led to a widespread redistribution of property, with the bourgeoisie and peasant landowners emerging as the chief beneficiaries. Some farm workers also seized the opportunity to buy land. The land transfer was facilitated through the sale of assignats, bonds issued by the National Constituent Assembly and guaranteed by the value of church lands. Although these bonds were initially meant to be retired after the transfer, they soon evolved into a form of revolutionary currency, leading to inevitable inflation. Having stripped the Church of its resources, the Assembly moved to reorganize it, enacting the civil constitution of the clergy. This move was met with staunch opposition from Pope Pius VI and many French clergy, resulting in a schism that further fueled the accompanying controversies. Pause 2s. The National Constituent Assembly also dismantled the complicated administrative system of the Ancien Régime, replacing it with a rational system based on the division of France into départements, districts, cantons and communes, all administered by elected assemblies. The principles underpinning the administration of justice were radically transformed, aligning the system with the new administrative divisions. Notably, judges were now to be elected. In an attempt to create a balanced monarchical regime, the Assembly envisioned shared legislative and executive powers between the king and an assembly. However, this delicate balance was undermined by King Louis XVII's indecisiveness and his reliance on aristocratic advisors. His attempt to flee the country on June 20, 1791, only to be apprehended at Varennes and brought back to Paris, marked a significant turning point. The revolution was far from over, and the new regime set the stage for the tumultuous years that lay ahead. To pause 1s. Following the establishment of the new regime, France became a beacon of hope for revolutionaries across Europe who had faced defeat in their own countries. However, not everyone within France supported these radical changes. A number of French counter-revolutionaries, nobles, ecclesiastics and some bourgeois, abandoned the fight and emigrated. These émigrés formed armed groups near the northeastern frontier of France, seeking assistance from European rulers, who initially displayed indifference but soon grew concerned when the National Constituent Assembly proclaimed the revolutionary principle of international law, the right of self-determination. Pause 1s. This principle led to the reunification of the papal territory of Avignon with France on September 13, 1791. By early 1792, both radicals eager to spread revolutionary ideals and King Louis XVI, hoping war would either bolster his authority or invite foreign rescue, supported aggressive policies. Consequently, France declared war against Austria on April 20, 1792. The initial phase of the war saw France suffering defeats, with Prussia joining the conflict in July and an Austro-Prussian army advancing rapidly toward Paris. Pause 1s. Believing the monarchy had betrayed them, especially with Queen Marie Antoinette secretly encouraging her brother, Holy Roman Emperor Leopold II, to invade, Parisian revolutionaries stormed the Tuileries Palace on August 10, 1792, imprisoning the royal family. At the beginning of September, a Parisian mob broke into prisons, massacring nobles and clergy. Meanwhile, French nationalism surged, and volunteers flooded into the army. In a decisive effort, French forces halted the Prussian advance at Valmy on September 20, 1792. Pause 1s. The next day, the newly formed National Convention abolished the monarchy and declared the establishment of the Republic. In the subsequent phase of the war, September 1792, April 1793, the revolutionaries gained the upper hand, occupying Belgium, the Rhineland, Savoy, and Nice. Within the National Convention, the Girondins advocated for a bourgeois republic and the spread of revolution across Europe, while the Montagnards, led by Maximilien Robespierre, sought to empower the lower classes politically and economically. Pause 1s. Despite Girondin efforts, King Louis XVI was tried, condemned for treason, and executed on January 21, 1793, with Marie Antoinette meeting the same fate 9 months later. The spring of 1793 marked a new phase of the war, with Austria, Prussia, and Great Britain forming the first coalition against France. The French suffered losses, and invading forces threatened Paris, strengthening the extremists' resolve. Pause 1s. The Girondins were ousted from the National Convention, and the Montagnards, supported by the Paris Sans-Culottes, seized power. To meet the demands of defense, they adopted radical economic and social policies, including government price controls, the maximum, taxing the rich, providing national assistance to the poor and disabled, mandating free and compulsory education, and confiscating émigré property. Pause 1s. These measures provoked violent reactions, leading to the Wars of the Vendée, Federalist uprisings and revolts in Lyon, Bordeaux and Brittany. The Reign of Terror, September 5th, 1793, July 27th, 1794, ensued, resulting in the arrest of at least 300,000 suspects, 17,000 executions, and many more deaths in prisons or extrajudicial killings. Despite the internal turmoil, the revolutionary government raised an army of over 1 million men. Pause 1s. In the spring of 1794, the French achieved a brilliant victory over the Austrians at Fleurus on June 26, 1794, enabling the reoccupation of Belgium. This victory rendered the terror and economic restrictions unnecessary. Robespierre, who had championed these measures, was overthrown and executed on July 28, 1794. Following his fall, the maximum was abolished, social laws were relaxed, and economic equality efforts ceased. Pause 1s. A reactionary period set in with the National Convention debating a new constitution. Meanwhile, a royalist white terror erupted in the west and southeast. Royalists attempted to seize power in Paris but were thwarted by the young General Napoleon Bonaparte on October 5, 1795. Shortly thereafter, the National Convention dispersed, marking yet another turning point in the tumultuous French Revolution. Pause 2s. The revolution had profoundly transformed France, but the journey was far from over. The stage was set for further upheavals, with new leaders emerging and old conflicts simmering beneath the surface. Pause 1s. With the fall of Robespierre and the end of the Reign of Terror, France entered a new phase in its revolutionary journey. The Constitution of the year Third, approved by the National Convention, established the Directory, a government structure designed to balance power and prevent the rise of another authoritarian regime. Pause 1s. The executive power was vested in a directory of 5 members, while legislative power was divided between 2 chambers, the Council of Ancients and the Council of the 500, collectively known as the Corps Législatif. This bourgeois republic aimed for stability, but the ongoing wars and internal conflicts made it a challenging goal to achieve. Pause 1s. France's revolutionary fervour continued to ripple across Europe, perpetuating the struggle between revolutionaries and counter-revolutionaries. The war exacerbated tensions between the Directory and the legislative councils, leading to a series of coups d'état. Notably, the coup of 18 Fructidor, year Fèvre, September 4, 1797, expelled royalists from the Directory and the councils, while the coup of 18 Brumaire, year the 8th, November 9, 1799, saw General Napoleon Bonaparte abolish the Directory and assume power as France's first consul. Pause 1s. Following the victory at Fleurus, French armies continued their advance across Europe. The Rhineland and Holland were occupied, and by 1795 peace treaties were negotiated with Holland, Tuscany, Prussia and Spain. Bonaparte's campaign in Italy in 1796 swiftly brought Sardinia to terms, and Austria eventually capitulated with the Treaty of Campo Formio in 1797. The occupied territories were transformed into sister republics, mirroring revolutionary France's institutions. Pause 1s. Despite continental peace, revolutionary expansion persisted. The Directory, influenced by the Girondin ambition to spread the revolution, supported Jacobin appeals from abroad. French troops marched into Switzerland, the Papal States and Naples in 1798 and 1799, establishing the Helvetic, Roman and Parthenopean republics. However, Great Britain remained a formidable adversary. Pause 1s. In an effort to undermine British power, the Directory, at Bonaparte's behest, launched an expedition to Egypt. Although French forces successfully occupied Malta and Egypt, Horatio Nelson's fleet decimated the French squadron at the Battle of the Nile on 14 Thermidor, year the 6th, August 1st, 1798. This defeat spurred the formation of a second coalition, with Austria, Russia, Turkey and Great Britain uniting against France. Pause 1s. The coalition's successes in 1799 pushed French forces back to their borders, prompting Bonaparte to return to France. Leveraging his immense popularity and the government's declining credibility, he orchestrated the coup d'etat of 18 Brumaire. This decisive move dismantled the Directory and established the consulate, with Bonaparte at its helm. Though he declared the revolution over, Bonaparte would soon spread its ideals across Europe in new and transformative ways. Pause 2S. The French Revolution had set the stage for profound change, but the story was far from over. With Napoleon Bonaparte's rise, a new chapter in European history was about to unfold.